Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Corlick from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Figure It Out cast for October 2025. I can't believe it's already October. Yeah, I know, right? So I am your host. I am Adam Corlick, and as always, just for those joining us, this is a Patreon-backed podcast. If you are hearing it on YouTube, that is when it came out on YouTube, but initially it goes up on Patreon with early access to all backers, as well as anybody else who feels like supporting it for any other reason. You get early access to all my videos. You can get shout-outs. You can pick subjects. You can be on this podcast. All these options exist. Please check it out on Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, also, if you could just do me a favor, like this video, comment down below, and subscribe if you've never done that before. Check out all the social media stuff like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, obviously Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, all that stuff. Appreciate it. Now, back to Patreon backers. As I said, you can join us, and one has. Welcome back, Joseph. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad to be back here.
I always appreciate it. Yeah, you've had like kind of a strange, turbulent month, but it's good to see everything's kind of stabilizing for you again.
Yeah.
We don't need to go into that unless you want to, but
nah.
All right, cool. Then screw that. Let's go ahead and start talking about subjects. All right, so one of the perks that he gets is that he gets to pick a subject. This one seemed pretty obvious. I think actually, Joseph, when this happened, I think I DM'd you like a week or two ago, and I was like, yeah, well, thanks, Microsoft. You already picked what we're talking about.
Exactly.
So since I ended up kind of doing a separate video on it, I basically wanted your thoughts, but also I'll just give any other additional follow-ups or new inputs as I go. But please, take it away.
Okay, so I'm sure everyone knows Microsoft's doing some stuff, and it has people a bit pissed, I think is the most polite way I can go ahead and put it. But the main thing that originally sparked this, that what Adam was mentioning, was the whole thing with Xbox Game Pass again, I think. So that was basically, spoiler alert if you somehow don't know this already, Xbox Game Pass price go up again. Because Microsoft is doing exactly what the plan was the entire time. Basically.
Yeah. Yeah, keep going. You know I want to rant, so just go.
I know. But, so, like, obviously, like, and the thing with it is it's not just the fact that the price went up, it's that it went up by, like, a lot. Like, the version of Game Pass that I'm subscribed to for the next 2 days at this point, before, my sub expires and doesn't renew, was $20. It was Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. That's gone up to $30. So it's a 50% increase. And this is coming on the heels of Microsoft and Xbox raising the prices of the Xbox again. And it's just like, I think why everyone's so annoyed about it is like, besides, the fact that money go up, economy bad, people have less money, they don't want what they're paying to go up, is basically just a case of too much things going, Microsoft just doing too many price hikes at once because they either have, I don't necessarily think they might have had to with Game Pass yet. They might have, they might not have, but with all the everything else going on, they had no choice on the whole Xbox thing. You don't raise the price of your current gen console 5 years in by like $100 and whatever bucks that they did because you want to. So
yeah, that was a more of an obligation thing. So before we continue, I did a video on this subject. Did you happen to watch it?
I did, but I watched it when it came out, and that was a while ago.
At the time of this recording, that was like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I'm not expecting you to memorize it. Just make sure we're kind of on that same page. For those who did not see it, I do suggest seeing it. But basically, to overall truncate it, I was just kind of breaking down each one of these points. Like Game Pass, this was always the plan, is that it always had to go up because since the inception of the original Xbox, the idea with that Microsoft had was to basically have some control over the direction of the gaming industry after they had basically protected the PC as a concept, which was the goal of the original Xbox. The 360 was like the only system they made where the goal was kind of to actually make a standalone console that was in of itself successful, and it would have succeeded had it not been for the Red Rings of Death fiasco that financially hurt them. From Xbox One onward, the goal became more of a let's use the hardware to justify the software model, and let's try to create Windows, an irreplaceable, absolute, essential infrastructure for game consoles and gaming in general. Now, that is what Game Pass is. It simply has not succeeded at that yet. We just have too many alternatives. And that's where I think that they really messed up here, is if you want to continue to get people to just be like, shall we say, addicted to Game Pass, you have to continue to basically make the cocaine cheap. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how that has to work. But they're basically trying to, jack up the prices of the drug when not enough people are addicted.
Basically,
now,
yeah.
So we'll go back to that in a second, but just to kind of touch on the hardware part, again, there was a whole long explanation about this, but the hardware part is not actually their fault. Everyone is suffering from this, and it mostly has to boil down to geopolitical events that are completely outside their control, namely certain wars because of certain resources that are necessary to actually manufacture Xboxes and PlayStations and Switches and so on and so forth. Basically, because of certain wars and certain sanctions, it's not really that feasible to do it on the cheap anymore. That is not Microsoft's fault. It is just the simple reality we live in. But as Joseph is pointing out very correctly, people have this kind of like really being attacked on all sides attitude about this. You sit there and you go, my food is going up, my rent is going up, my taxes are going up, my everything is going up, and my escapism, the thing that I look to ignore all my problems, is also going up. I mean, escapism is not new in the human experience, and often escapism done for affordability can actually build empires. Like, have you ever seen Gone with the Wind? Gone with the Wind, it's still adjusted for inflation, a movie that came out in 1939, is the highest grossing film of all time, again adjusted for inflation, when film ticket prices were like a nickel, and it made like $200 million in that era. That's insane. But the reason they did that is that was the height of the Great Depression, as well as World War II breaking out in Europe. Like, it was a bad era, but escapism. You had a nice, affordable way to just get away from all of this. And that's what video games are supposed to be able to function like. But then the video games are attacking you too. The hardware is getting more expensive. The games are getting more expensive. The gaming delivery mechanism is getting more expensive. And people are just really fed up with it. And I really don't blame them. It's incredibly frustrating. Yeah. And I won't name names, Joseph, but I had a call recently with someone who will remain nameless. And he is someone I know, someone I trust, someone I believe. And he was like, yeah, I recently went to this like Xbox party, and a lot of senior staff of Xbox are there. And I don't think he told me the name of who he was talking to. It wasn't Phil Spencer, although he did say Phil Spencer was there. But he said, I was talking to one of these guys, and he was like, the problem is that everything I said in my video is completely correct, except that they don't see it as a problem. They see it as gaming is, ubiquitous. It should exist on every platform, and all the same games should be there. Where my friend was trying to tell him, like, no, there's a difference between a console gamer and a PC gamer and a mobile gamer. They genuinely don't see a difference in that. They just see that as archaic mentality, where modern mentality should be all games are just... they're just digital content that could be displayed on a different screen somewhere. And our job is, to display it wherever we feel like it. And, we don't really care how you do it. We don't care if you buy an Xbox. We want you to buy your TV with a built-in Xbox Game Pass. That's fine. As long as you're playing our games and getting something out of that experience, because all games are digital, blah, 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 blah. That was essentially the case that he was making to my friend. And my friend was just blown away by it, because he's just like, that's so not true. Like, it's just, there's so many different dimensions to what gamers are, And the guy argued, he's like, well, we understand there are physical media enthusiasts, but like really the physical media sales are a joke. And he's like, yeah, but they're a joke because you've watered them down so much. Like there's so few Xbox games that get full releases. And these dudes just did not grasp that part of the reason that side of things doesn't perform well is because they've so made it so difficult for it to do so. It was a very fascinating call because my friend called me up like maybe a couple hours after my video came out to essentially confirm all this and say like, yeah, you'll never believe what happened to me when he was telling me that story. I know it was very enlightening. I was like, can I talk to this guy? And he's like, I'll see if I can arrange it. But he's like, I kind of doubt it because he's like, it would be an interesting debate to like sit you down with them because they all kind of agree on the same mindset. They really just see all games as the same thing and they should just be on everything. And when they hear like PlayStation doesn't want them, they just don't understand because they're like, we're happy to give them our games. We don't care. You know, we don't care if you buy an Xbox. We don't care what hardware it is. Play it on a PC. It doesn't matter. All games should coexist under the same umbrella. Now, let's take with a grain of salt that whole story, all right? For argument's sake, let's say that's all true. That means what Microsoft's current mindset is they believe in like the old 3DO model, where we should just replace all competition with a single device. And yeah, different companies can make same device, whatever it is, but it's ultimately the same platform. And everybody should just support that. And it should just be, this is the thing. The way, and I've described this when I was talking about the 3DO, the way you would have like VHS versus beta, but then beta lost, so it was just VHS. And then it was just DVD. Mm-hmm. You know, that's just the delivery mechanism for movies in that era. And that seems to be Microsoft's approach with gaming, is that there shouldn't be competition over the hardware. There should just be a agreed upon system by which games are delivered, and then everybody can coexist inside that system. So Sony could make games within Xbox Game Pass, Nintendo could, or whoever it is. And to think you've not only said, okay, we're going to set out on that being our objective, but that you already believe that you're there and that is correct and that no one disagrees with you is baffling.
That part's baffling. I get where they're coming from, and I get why they want it, because where they came from. They're Microsoft. They make Windows. Windows is on a bunch of machines built by every single company that's basically not making a Mac. Like, I understand why they want it that way. I'm just surprised that they think they're actually there when they're in the obvious third spot.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, again, take it with a grain of salt. This is a story my friend told me of, something that he witnessed because he was having the discussion. So, grain of salt. But let's for argument's sake, say that that's true. It would explain a lot about the delusional measure of behavior that comes out of them and how, like, whenever there's bad news, they just don't care. They don't care. They're not bothered by it. They're just like, whatever, we believe in the vision. We're going this direction, and then that's fine. And I guess maybe you're also seeing, like, the logical conclusion of what happens when you have so much liquidity, financial liquidity and security, that it's not possible for you to fail. Like, the only thing that can really make the Xbox brand fail, like truly, genuinely, is if Microsoft itself said, we are no longer interested in subsidizing this division. That is the only thing that could kill it. There is, and I want this to be very clear to everybody out there, this has nothing to do with, like, fanaticism of the Xbox. Although, hilariously, on that video, I was accused of being an Xbox fanboy, a PlayStation fanboy, a Nintendo fan. People write their own narrative in their head and just, okay, whatever. But, and objectively speaking, there is nothing Sony could do that would make the Xbox brand fail. There's nothing Nintendo... Correct. Nothing Nintendo could do. Nothing Steam could do. The money simply exists in overwhelming amounts. This is not Sega. This is not a company whose entire business model was predicated on this needed to work or not. The Xbox has never worked financially, and it does not matter. It continues to endure simply because of the infinite money code that Microsoft itself has, which is subsidized. This is true. So the only thing that kills the Xbox off is that decision by Microsoft itself. And that's the part that remains a mystery to me, because this wasn't, my friend had no information on this, but basically the Xbox team does not doubt where they are. They do not doubt the objectives. They do not doubt their successes, etc. Microsoft higher ups, we hear these rumors and murmurs all the time about, oh, they might kill off the brand, which if I was a numbers guy at Microsoft looking at how much the Xbox brand costs us every year, I might question why we continue to sustain this. But inevitably, somebody comes to them with a fancy pitch about, maybe we can take over the gaming space with what our vision is. And that probably sounds to you pretty good if you're up at Microsoft. You're like, well, okay, I didn't realize we were trying to basically take over the entirety of the industry. I guess that would cost a lot to get into.
Right.
We're still like the third or second most valuable company in the world. I guess we're fine.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this, Joseph, is we have to look back at this in totality, like the great picture that is Microsoft and the Xbox. And it is actually genuinely fascinating to see a product that in of itself is good, but has undeniably failed from a financial perspective, and yet is allowed to endure because of the most unique of circumstances. And we have to sit here watching it, entertain the notion that it may fail every year. Oh, this is it. Microsoft's done with the Xbox. And yet it just keeps surviving because, ironically, it's essentially indestructible.
Yeah, as long as Microsoft higher-ups can be convinced by the Xbox team to keep giving Xbox money, Xbox will keep existing.
Let me put it this way. In comic book terms, the Xbox is Superman. Microsoft is the Yellow Sun. And the only kryptonite is the Yellow Sun itself if it's shut off.
Yep.
That's the only reason there would be kryptonite. And you can look at it and be like, oh, Doomsday is coming for him. Oh man, Lex Luthor is coming for him. He's going to get him this time. Trust me, Superman's going to win this one. It's just how it always works out.
Yep.
Because he has the Yellow Sun. It's not going anywhere. If you destroy that, then you got a shot. But that's the only kind of simplistic way I can put it. And it's, I don't know, coming to terms with that call was very fascinating to me after I got off the phone with him, because I was just like, it doesn't really matter, does it? Like, they're going to just keep doing this. It does not matter if they upset people. Like, Game Pass, we think had the reason the price increase happened was some measure of response to that whole like $300 million loss by Call of Duty. And according to what my friend said in the call they had, or the talk that they had in person, they were just kind of shrugging that kind of thing off. Like, it's the breaking the eggs to make the omelet. It's like, okay.
I mean,
like, how do you
I can kind of get the perspective there a little bit, because when you look at like Xbox Game Pass, like the price for like Ultimate, which is everything, at $30 a month, and then you think about it like, okay, games cost $70 or $80, like new AAA games. New AAA games show up on Game Pass. You play one of those and you pay for it. You pay for it for the month, like, which is how I used to look at it. And why, like, when I would go when it was only $20, like, I'd occasionally be like, oh, I didn't use Game Pass this month. Oh well, because like I used to be able to just basically go like, okay, here's 2 indie games I'm kind of interested in. Oh, cool, that paid for itself. Neat. Because as long as you keep playing new games, it's kind of worth it. The issue is that if a new game doesn't come out, and like at this point now, like throwing away like almost half of a game a month to not use a thing is just like, seems dumb. Which is why I'm actually canceling the subscription, despite the fact that the price hike technically didn't even go into effect yet, and I would only be paying $20 for next month. It's just like,
yeah,
like 3 games that I want to play that I'm in the middle of playing came out this past month. I'm not using Game Pass this month. Like, it's just, I don't have the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. I was just thinking about it too. Like, there's the whole thing is just so convoluted. Somebody in the comments actually made a really good point about this, and he said you got to understand, comparing it to Windows, at least if that's the model they're going for, isn't a perfect example, because Windows doesn't have a monthly fee. You know, if it did, Windows may be a lot less popular. And it makes me sit here go like, do we just live in the transition phase? Are we just in the spot, that point in time where they just haven't quite figured out how to make Game Pass profitable and essential at the same time? Because, you know, Windows, I mean, when was the last time you actually even paid for Windows? Like, I bought a copy of Windows 7
8 years ago when I built my computer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I bought a copy of Windows 7 off of some, like, you know, like, random keys website, you know, like, whatever, this current rig, like 2 years ago. And Microsoft was still and is still updating for free to Windows 10 and then now Windows 11. And you just go like, where is this money coming from? And that key was only like $30. Under the current model, that's like 1 month of Game Pass. And, you know, but still, Windows obviously makes money because clearly it's just the standard. Anybody who wants a PC, you know, uses it.
Yeah,
a lot of people were also pointing out,
when you buy a PC, part of the agreement there and part of the price that you're paying for is the Windows key that the manufacturers use. Or if you're like me and you build your own computer and you don't want to deal with like the watermarks everywhere saying like, please activate Windows, you buy Windows, and then you have the full version. So it's not like people aren't buying Windows. They're just not. They're just like, well, if we make them pay for an upgrade to Windows and then their computer runs like shit, that's going to sound really bad to us. That's going to sound really, really bad. Let's maybe not do that if they're upgrading their 8-year-old computer, and we'll just get money from them when they actually build their or buy their next one.
Yeah, and they clearly have made that model work. What they clearly have not made work yet is Game Pass. Like, they have put so much money into getting it, and it still doesn't really produce anything. Yet, I almost respect the insanity of thinking that this plan is the right course. I mean, for all we know, it may work because they just force it to. Like we just said, that yellow sun is not going anywhere. And eventually, like, how does anybody compete with that at a certain point? And that's where you get into things like monopolies, and it gets kind of scary. But I don't know, man. Like I said, that call was kind of enlightening. And seeing some of the people's like points about, you know, Windows versus Game Pass model, because I think a lot of us are focusing far too small on this. We're just focusing about that like $30 a month fee, which is annoying, but like bigger picture here, dude, you are talking about the loss of competition. You're talking about the loss of independent distribution. Like you're talking about a lot of things that are a lot bigger than your fee going from $20 to $30 a month. I got a simple answer for you here. You don't want that, just don't support it. But at the same time, sadly, it may not matter. Like they may just force it into existence anyway. So I don't know, dude. Like I guess I don't really have an answer for you here.
I mean, yeah, to go back to like the hardware thing for a second, like we saw all those stories about like stores pulling Xbox shelf space. Like, yes. I don't know how many of them are legitimately true, because I heard people like with like the whole Walmart and Target thing being like, no, that's not true. But Costco very much did remove their Xbox section, which, let's be fair, it's Costco. You don't really go there to buy video games or electronics, even though they have been there. But at the same time, like a retailer reacting to Xbox having to update like the price of their hardware to a price where people, frankly, are not going to be willing to pay it, and going just like, well, there's no reason to keep this shit here. Or Microsoft being like, well, there's no reason to keep a physical presence here. No one's going to buy it. From there, if they want an Xbox badly enough, they'll buy it from us directly, and then just not paying for the shelf space anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, the retailers thing is more of a separate issue, but it's just symbolic of, like, they just had a bad week, man. Like, all that stuff happened all at the same time. But, like, as I said before, if it's true, based, again, grain of salt on that whole story, if it's true they genuinely don't care if you have Xbox hardware or not, that does track. because
it also does explain why the price hike was even as high as it was, and they didn't try to just like eat the cost or anything, because they're like, well, if as long as you're playing our games, if you're playing on PC, we don't care. So
yeah, that's actually a very valid point that I wish I had thought of, because you can't blame Microsoft for the price increase from a simple material and production perspective. However, you can quote unquote blame them for not being willing to eat the cost when they obviously could afford to do so. And the reason they no doubt didn't is because they're like, what's the point? We don't really care if anybody does buy the hardware, so why lose more money on it?
yeah,
There's a case there. There really is. It is truly the strangest model, and yet you can't even argue that it doesn't work, because it works in the sense that it's completely subsidized. But yeah, that's what makes it so baffling. Like, we could be talking about
Game Pass works enough that people are annoyed about it too.
Yeah, like we could, yeah, that's true. We could look at this years down the road and be like, man, Game Pass is now like the industry standard. It's on everything, blah, blah, blah. And you look back at the history of it and you're like, this product was doomed to failure. It was a financial disaster, and yet it endured. And the only reason it did is because it was subsidized its entire lifespan until it had no choice but to be the only option left. And if we get to that phase, that's just a weird story of capitalism right there. Yeah. Anyway, anything else you want to say on this whole Xbox thing?
I think we covered a lot of it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I even covered the fact that when you objectively just like look at like the price and what you do with Xbox, with Game Pass, that it doesn't actually like seem like super unreasonable. It's just that price goes up, and it's just at the point now where you can't really justify it as a no-brainer anymore. You have to actually think of, do I want Game Pass this month or not?
I mean,
obviously Pass, you never want it.
Yeah,
that's what
I know. I'm trying to make a point though. Like, I'm trying to say, like, obviously I was never the target demographic for Game Pass. This is not a secret. Like, I don't value digital content. I'm certainly not going to subscription model, whatever. I have games, blah, blah, blah. But I do look at people who, you know, more so your casuals, but that doesn't mean it's always casuals, obviously. It could mean people who are really into video games, they just can't afford a lot of them, which is a completely reasonable standpoint to have. And you look at it and you go, man, if I played enough games, Game Pass is really quite a deal for me. And there's definitely going to be people out there who are like, look, man, $30 a month does kind of suck. But, like, I play so many games, and this thing has everything. I never need to go buy a game, and I don't really care if I ever play a game again. I just want to play this game, see what it was, and move on with my life. That's where Game Pass does excel as a product. It's just, to me, it's abhorrent as an idea. But that doesn't mean that I'm right. It just means that I'm different. And I look at people like that, and I go, okay, this is what this is made for. But again, if that conversation my friend had any weight, if it's true, if everything he said is true, then that gamer I just described to you is what Microsoft, or specifically the Xbox team, interprets every gamer as being like. And that is the scariest part.
That is the scary part, yeah. Like, the instant, like, if Sony has their own version of Game Pass, basically, the PlayStation Plus thing, but they don't put their day one games on it. If Sony starts thinking like Microsoft, like, the game industry as we know it is completely gone.
I mean, I can already tell you they're not going to do that. And the simple reason, they would have done it already.
Yeah, no, they absolutely would have done it already. But yeah.
Well, the thing is, Xbox can afford to do that for reasons we've already explained. Sony is, ironically, kind of in the position Sega was in at one point. Sony is now more associated with the PlayStation brand than it is any other product. Now, it has other revenue streams. It would be delusional to say that they don't. But it's still like almost a make or break product for them now, is the success of the PlayStation brand. Must work. And so you're not going to sit there and be like, oh, our major franchise, let's put it free on the streaming service to kind of bolster the numbers there. They're going to be like, no. The sales losses would be ridiculous. We're certainly not going to do that. Maybe we'll put it there in like a year or two, but not now. That's
no. That's the same reason why their games don't come to the PC day one.
Yeah, and it's ironic that they get to function more like a traditional game console model, just because they don't have the kind of money that Xbox has.
Like
it's
started
very
at
weird.
Microsoft's position, like
Yeah.
when the PlayStation first started. But it's weird to think of that, like unlike Microsoft, like all their other like major money sources kind of dried up.
Yeah, and I look at Nintendo, and you sit there, and we've been making fun of them now for like 20 years for being like a generation behind on everything. But man, they really did do a good job carving out their own corner
Yeah,
and saying like, "This is us. We're over here. Leave us alone." And we're not a direct threat to anybody, and we're also unique. We ride solely on the strange oddities that are our IP. You can only get it here.
and we
that's
have
just
a
the way
ton
they
of
do
it.
business. Yeah, exactly. That's the way they do business, and it continues to work. It is funny, like when you see people, like if you wanted to sit down and prove Microsoft wrong about that mentality, like literally all you'd have to do is point to the Switch. You don't even have to get into weird, obscure history. Just be like, dude, that system right over there, which does not have Game Pass and has all of its own exclusive content and has at least Switch 1 has dependable physical media and blah 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 blah. That thing is the second, maybe eventually the highest selling game console of all time. And this is not ancient history. It is still relevant.
Yeah, like,
And yet it's like you're just pretending it doesn't exist.
yeah, like it is weird that like the Switch is, like you said, the second.
Did it actually beat the DS? Because the DS was the second. I don't know if it actually beat that yet, but if it didn't, it's damn close. Anyway,
second or third.
Point is made. Yeah.
The point is, the only thing it really would, quote, lose to numbers wise at this point is the PS2, which a sizable amount of those sales were from the DVD player rather than the actual video games. So
yeah, I mean, dude, it's close too, because I think the last time I checked, Switch was like 154 million, DS was like 155 or maybe 154.5, and then the PS2 was 160. So it's not like a massive lead.
yeah,
But that was like a year ago. Like I said, that could have changed. I think Switch 2 no doubt decelerated the Switch 1 sales. But
probably.
but
I
the
mean,
point is
they
made.
needed to do the Switch 2 at this
I
point.
agree completely. I agree. I said that for years. I was like, they're not gonna hang on to the Switch 1 just to reach an arbitrary benchmark. They're gonna release the hardware when they're ready, and they did. But that's different. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I want to sit down in a room with these guys and like have that conversation. And one thing that my friend said, because he didn't talk to Phil Spencer, but he talked to this guy, and this guy said this is what Phil Spencer would say to any of this, which is he has the same usual response. When you talk about like, you don't understand, like consoles need exclusives because that drives, value to the system, the value propagation of the hardware, or proposition rather. The value proposition of the hardware is having unique experiences on it. Phil Spencer's usual response to something like that is basically, I don't think it's in the best interest to limit when the best games are playable to who, and to choose the audience. The best game should be available to everybody, which is, kind of la-di-da, hippity-dippity nice in philosophy. But much like communism doesn't really work on, except on paper. There's actual practical issues with that in a capitalist structure. And again, if it were not for the yellow sun that is Microsoft, the Xbox team would have failed out of existence in legendary status. Imagine Xbox as it is, as a separate corporation, maybe run by Dell or something, and it went under the insane losses that it goes through every year. There's no chance in its business model that it would have survived.
It wouldn't have even gotten to Game Pass. Like, it would have lost, and they would have run out of business in Xbox One. Yeah.
Yeah, the original. That one was net negative $4.4 billion. It did not make money. There are many consoles that left the industry for far smaller
Okay,
failures.
yeah, that's also true. Yeah,
and that's all I'm trying to say is it is just baffling seeing this. You get to see behind the curtain where you get to see that the
I forgot how
just an old
much
guy.
money OG Xbox lost.
Yeah, like right there is where it would have ended for anybody else. But I don't know. It's baffling. And one day, like going back and looking at the full Xbox story is going to be like a hell of a movie, man.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Anything else you want to say on this?
Nah. I think we're ready to move on.
All right, then. All right, so thank you, Joseph, for that particular subject. Next up is a subject from Sinjeet, who gets to pick one. He, however, did not actually have one. So, Joseph, you ended up picking this one as well. Hit me.
Okay, so back to talking about bad stuff happening with video games.
Really?
EA has agreed to a sale from various private equity firms, including one that's like the Saudi government's like one or something like that. So we're in a bit of a weird situation if that like sale ever actually goes through, and politicians in the U.S. don't block it for concerns for whatever reason, which apparently they're considering doing because the Saudi government's involved. But even if they weren't, this would still honestly be really bad news.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, Joseph. This is not a subject I knew. I saw the headlines, but I mean, I don't know a whole lot about this. I do know.
There's not really a lot about it yet, other than the fact that there are 3 private equity firms involved. One of them is connected to the Saudi government, and that it's a leveraged buyout of the company.
Okay, so they're basically forcing the sale.
So basically, what a leveraged buyout is that basically it's when you're making the purchase like of the company. What happens is that you finance a lot of debt to be able to do that, and then you add that debt to the company that you're buying. Mm-hmm. If this sounds vaguely familiar at all, this is what killed Toys R Us.
Ah, yes. The corporate overlord pushes the debt onto other companies, yes, and does not allow them to really function. So basically, you're talking about the potential death of EA here.
Yes. I'm not gonna be hyperbolic and say that like every company that's gone under a leveraged buyout has died, because that's not true. But when you add that much debt to a company that they then have to try to pay off, they can't invest money into actually running the business. And when your business is making video games, you kind of need to have money available to invest into it to make the video games.
Yeah. Well, this screams of eventual collapse and fire sale. So let's assume that. But before we do that, let's... it's interesting because I didn't know this was a leverage buyout. So, because what I was going to say before is when it comes to Saudi stuff, I know that this, from a geopolitical perspective, Saudi Arabia as a country does not have the best image. Under its current, I don't know if he's technically the king or prince, but the dude who's in charge now is much younger than his father, whose father I think is still alive, and I think his father is technically king, but this dude is in charge just because he's much, much younger. And he's more of a the world has turned the page type of person, at least, not all the way up to modern Western social norms, but he's definitely more used to it. He, for example, accepts the existence of Israel, stuff like that. But he also apparently is trying to get Saudi Arabia to be seen more as a Western-friendly country with certain parameters. Namely, like, I don't know, maybe you heard about this, Joseph. There was this big stand-up comedy festival that they hosted where they brought in some of these, like, super extreme comedians, extremely popular ones and famous ones, and paid them, like, ridiculous sums of money to go perform there, which a lot of people saw as kind of hypocritical of those people just because they're preaching, free speech, and meanwhile they go to a gig where they're basically told, here's all the things you're not allowed to talk about, and it's pretty extensive. Yeah. And that's one type of thing. But meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is trying to improve the image of being like, hey, we want to attract more tourists. We want to look more like a normal country just with certain restrictions, while not addressing certain other issues, let's say, that the country is known for. And I want to leave it at that. So the idea of a video game company getting bought out there is not really that shocking, because if they want to get into Western media, that is kind of an interesting way to do it.
They already have SNK.
Yeah, that's right. SNK. This happened already. You're right. I completely forgot about that. Although I haven't. I mean, SNK did not have that kind of
No,
power or name at that point.
SNK is tiny compared
It's a
to EA.
yeah.
It's like it's a completely different thing.
Yeah. It's a drop in the bucket, effectively. But yeah, it's I sit there and I think about it, I'm like, what could they do with it? And then one kind of dawned on me. Are you aware that they have their own in Saudi Arabia? They created a professional golfing tournament that is a direct competitor to the PGA. I think it's called like LIV, like Live or something like that.
I was not aware of that.
Okay, so Live, from what I understand, I'm not a big golf guy, but I did do a little research in this. Live pays, it's basically recruits people from the PGA Tour. Your obvious choices would be people like Tiger Woods, although he turned down the contract. But a lot of others did. Now, the PGA Tour does not guarantee, it's not like the NBA or the NHL or anything where you get signed guaranteed money. You basically are paid per tournament, and your amount you make is based on your performance in that tournament. You're also required to go to every single event in the tournament, which can be like, I think it's like 24 tournaments a year. So it's pretty excessive. Whereas Live paid everybody guaranteed money, and we're talking like insane guaranteed money. Like one guy who I guess he ranked like third in the PGA, he cleared like $10 million for the year or something like that. Whereas the Saudis offered him, I think it was $150 million contract to only play like 6 tournaments. It's like the number, it's not even close. Like how much better you do playing in the Live tournament.
Right.
Now, the only reason I bring all of this up is Live is the thing that I guess the Saudis are trying, one of the many things they're trying to push to suggest like, hey, Western cultures, come on over, do this. Who is the biggest creator of sports video games?
EA.
Uh-huh.
That's actually that's actually a pretty benign reason for them to go after them, to be honest.
Does that matter?
No. But I mean,
dude, if you're talking about pissing away hundreds of millions of dollars on stuff like this, it sounds like that doesn't really matter. Because if you're basically saying we have a government initiative to get into Western media and we want to encourage our own domestic things like leagues and tournaments and so on and so forth, this is a pretty interesting way to do it. It's one, I'm not saying this like immediately makes everybody start watching like, Saudi Arabian golf, but like it's a way to make you more and more aware of it. When we start seeing like new golf games, they drop the PGA license and they go with the Live license, Saudi Arabia started allowing the WWE over there. Now, currently, I believe 2K makes those games, but I'm just saying like, I think the NBA wanted to do Saudi tournaments every once in a while. Like this is not unheard of to start seeing more of this. And we'll just have to see how this plays out. But
yeah.
I would be interested to see what kind of stuff will come out of that. Now, let's assume for argument's sake, the whole leverage thing, it was just a Saudi group participating in part of this, and it kind of doesn't matter. It's basically just going to debt trap the company into collapse. Let's talk about that scenario. So forget everything else I just said. All of that is just conjecture, blah, 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 blah. Let's go with this. If that company actually fails, I don't know what happens. Maybe the NFL license finally gets multi-diversified again.
I mean, yeah, like the NFL license or whatever their sports license, other sports licenses are, those just get chopped out to some other people. But if EA goes, well, that means BioWare is complete. That means BioWare is gone because, I mean, granted, BioWare hasn't really been doing well these past like 15 years or however long it's been since Mass Effect Andromeda came out, but
yeah,
BioWare would be gone.
The thing is, Joseph, EA is not a company that, I mean, have you noticed like how little people are pissed about this? It's because EA is already the company in gaming that everybody hates. It's right. We're already in that position. So it's like, of course they're going to do this. So I'm looking at a perspective of, yeah, this sucks from a economic standpoint and the diversification of media standpoint, but realistically there isn't really much to be upset about here because EA is not really that known for anything anymore that anybody really wants. I mean, do you remember when EA got the rights to Star Wars, how pissed off everyone was?
Yeah, I do.
And then they themselves botched it, and Ubisoft ended up with it for a bit. I think it's now kind of split, a bit, a few times. But it's like, what do they even have aside from the sports licenses that anybody would even want?
People seem to be liking.
I genuinely don't
6,
know.
But people seem to be liking Battlefield
That's a good
6.
One. Now I want to be very clear about this. Joseph makes a very good point about the development teams. There are great development teams that are stuck under the umbrella of EA. That is absolutely true. And I genuinely feel bad for those people because they very realistically will lose their jobs. It's not too likely that, people are just going to buy up development teams and then bring them over to other studios. Like Ubisoft is probably not going to buy out BioWare and bring them over. Like, that's probably not how that's going to work.
At best, they'll buy the IPs and then just do whatever they can with them. But
precisely.
EA actually going under would leave such a massive hole in the industry.
Yes, I agree.
Everyone hates them, but they're huge.
They are. Exactly. And this is the kind of same apocalyptic thing we've talked about with the potential of an Xbox departure were that to actually happen, like how insane that would be. EA is not on that level, obviously, because there were even rumors a while ago that Microsoft was considering buying EA. And I'll be honest with you, had it not been for how much attention was brought on them because of the Activision one, I can almost guarantee they would have put in a bid for EA. But that said, I think that I don't know EA's IPs off the top of my head. This might be kind of like when THQ broke up quite a few years ago, and there was just kind of a fire sale on a bunch of their IPs until, whatever was left. The rump roast ended up wherever it ended up. It would be a little scary because EA is a legacy company that has been around for a very long time. And just so you guys are aware, when these situations happen, like, yeah, the golf license might go to the highest bidder or whatever, but there's all sorts of IPs that they've had dating back to, the 80s that have been sitting dormant since the 80s. And that's where you get individuals who buy stuff. And that's how certain things like backwards compatibility programs stop working because, like, who the hell owns this game now? Don't really know. I mean, you watch some of my Dreamcast videos, that dude Josh Prod.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the games he owns, it happened from situations like this. Like, what was the game? Flashback. One of the most famous PC games of, like, the early 90s. It had a bunch of console versions as well. My boy owns the rights to that game because of this type of situation.
Yeah,
and so that's a good... Yeah, that's the kind of scenario where this type of thing happens. Is if a company like EA goes under, there's these, like, particularly like legacy older content they've been sitting on that they just do not touch, that Ubisoft's not going to bid for, but maybe hell, Mr. Beast or somebody is just like, I'm going to buy up the rights to whatever, I don't know what game, but it doesn't even have to be him. Like, my buddy Josh Prod is not exactly a wealthy guy, but nobody put in a bid against him, so he won it. That type of thing. And like Road Rash. Okay, Road Rash. Do you remember Road Rash from the Genesis? I don't remember the last time they made a Road Rash game, but something like that. Even further back than that, more obscure than that. You never know. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes if indeed the studio collapses from all this. For all we know, like, this is, like, he was, like, everybody, like Joseph was saying earlier, this situation is so new and so undeveloped. It could be basically one or the other things we've talked about. It's a leverage buyout. It kills the company. Assets are divided amongst, and that's a great way for everybody to write off their debt, and they kill a company in the process. EA shareholders are happy because they got paid and they didn't care. That's a possibility. It's also possible this Saudi group absorbs it and then repurposes it for their own uses, their own ends, like pushing the LIV tournament in golf. We don't really know yet. But I can tell you this, Joseph and I, when we get more information, we'll probably end up talking about it because we love talking about this kind of thing.
Yeah, it is just new. Like, the only reason why I brought it up is because, A, it's new and it's important to talk about, and B, because I didn't see a lot of people mentioning the whole leveraged buyout part of the thing. They were all focused on the Saudi Arabia thing, which,
that's what gets
to be fair, is an important thing to think about. But it's like, you guys do remember what leveraged buyouts have a tendency to do, right?
Yeah.
So
You see, I didn't even know that part till you mentioned it. So that says exactly.
yeah,
the
I
correct
had
thing.
to dig
Unfortunately,
to actually confirm that it was in fact a leveraged buyout, but
that
yeah.
key word right there, you had to dig, because unfortunately, this is something I'll tell anybody out there listening. We live in an age now where news kind of requires you to dig, because, and I'll say this as someone who's been making YouTube content for whatever, 15, 16 years. Only sensationalism gets people's attention. And I know this from videos I make. I've even commented on it in my videos. Like the exact video I talked about, what's going on at Xbox, that video got, like, at the time of this release, like 20,000 views, because it's something relevant, it's news and sensationalist. There's like a little fire in the thumbnail, blah, 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 blah. People cared. Whereas if I do like kind of a straight arrow talk about something I'm more passionate about, it's, even though it might be relevant information or interesting information, people don't seek it out because they find news to be entertainment now as opposed to informational. And that's really depressing.
Yeah.
So if you are the person out there that wants news for the purpose of news, information, unfortunately, we live in a time where you do have to actually dig for it. And I will fully admit, I did not do that in the case of the Saudi Arabia story, but I never claimed to be an expert on it, nor was I planning to do an individual story on it. But
Right.
we have covered, I think, both bases of where this might potentially go, in our opinion. And obviously, if that changes, we will tell you.
Yep.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to say on this?
Nope, I'm pretty spent for now on that.
All right.
Well,
Then that will do it for this subject. So thank you very much, Joseph, for picking that for Sinjit. Now we have a round of shout outs. The following people are all Patreon backers, and they are at the tier in which they get a shout out. So huge shout out to Trey Wagner, Michael Kelly, Loke, Sega Steve. Once again, that is Trey Wagner, Michael Kelly, Loke, and Sega Steve. Thank you so much. And now we move on. And we're back. We now have another subject up because we have a new returning champion. Well, not that new. You guys know him. Abdullah, welcome back to the podcast. Good to have you.
Always happy to be back here, and we have a very interesting topic today.
Oh, yeah. So basically, guys, here's what we're going to do. As Abdullah is, of course, one of the Patreon backers who gets to be on the podcast, he gets to pick a subject. And we, of course, have other people who just provide subjects. What I decided to do is combine them. So Abdullah and Spencer per year, we're going to basically use that time, both of their slots, to just talk all things NES, the original Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, the reason we're doing this, I'm sure you know, Abdullah, is that the NES sort of just hit its 40th birthday. And I feel like since it's such an influential system that it's really worth talking about. Now, people who listen to this may know I just did a video on this exact subject. So I'll give you a couple of the highlights, but I really wanted to do this because I wanted to, hear what Abdullah had to say, because he has a very different perspective growing up in a different era. But also because I felt like I didn't do enough to talk about the Famicom and maybe some of the European stuff and some of the stories of the NES as they exist in other parts of the world. And what better way to do that than to have someone who's literally from another country on here. So let me just get some of the basic elevator pitch history out of the way for everybody, and then we'll talk all about that stuff. But basically, the NES starts off as the Famicom in July of 1983 in Japan, which technically makes the hardware 42 years old, not 40. It would eventually make its way to North America and be released technically on October 18th, 1985. But because of the video game crash that had happened in 83, Nintendo did not have the confidence in the system to do a wide release all at once, hence that technical release. The wider release would come in September of 1986, and that's when it would blow up to become the NES as we know it. Now, that success meant that the system entered into other markets, places like Europe, places like Brazil, which I do want to touch on both of those. But that's in short what happens. And Abdullah, tell us anything you have to say about the NES. Like, when did you first hear about it? When did you first experience it? Because for the record, for everybody out there, I'm 38. I'm not even as old as the NES. And Abdullah, I think you're what? How old are you?
26 almost.
Yeah. So basically, we're both substantially younger. So we can only tell this as stories from our own perspective well after the fact. We were not there when any of these original events happened. But Abdullah, tell me your tale.
All right, so to me, the NES obviously, clearly from my age, you can see that I'm more of a sixth generation person. That's what I grew up with. And that would be the GameCube
So
mainly.
like GameCube.
Yeah, GameCube,
Yeah,
basically.
GameCube.
That's what I grew up with exactly. So to me, up to the point where I decided to be a collector, I knew about the NES, but I just knew that's the Nintendo, the original Nintendo. And then I started, learning about it and its history and how influential it was and how it dominated the market. It kind of kick-started or restarted the video game market uh, in the US. Uh, so that's kind of where my history with the console is. My history with the console is I was interested in it because of its history.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's just an infamous thing.
yeah, it's well known, it's significant, and it's weird
Yeah, that's a
looking,
good way of putting it.
for the NES, not the Famicom.
Yeah.
So imagine
You mean with
somebody,
the front load design?
yeah, exactly. The what is it called?
It's called a
Yeah,
front load
the
design.
the
So
front load.
I'll talk about that real quick just so people
Yeah,
know. So the Famicom, the Japanese version of the system, used a more traditional cartridge load where you just had a cartridge that goes in the top of the system, plug it in, done. When they brought it to North America, again because of the game crash, they were worried about people perceiving it too much like a normal game console. And so they were like, we need to make it seem more sophisticated, seem more technological, seem more like something an adult would consider an investment purchase for their child. And VCRs were big at the time, or for some reason, as younger generations refer to it as VHS players, which is never what it was called. But that technology, the idea of a tape just kind of going in, sitting down, and then like setting inside of the machine, they thought that they could do that with the NES, or the redesigned tech. So they designed this thing where you put the cartridge in face in and then press it down. And by pressing it down, it makes connections with the pins, and then the pins basically send the signal over a pass to the motherboard, and that's how you start playing your games. The problem with that design was that over time the pins bend from that
yeah.
pressure and cause it to stop working. So there's a lot of modern solutions to it, but yeah, that's known as the front load design.
The front load. Because in my head it was toaster, but I think that's the other one.
The toaster is like the AVGN one where you put it in the top, yeah.
Yeah.
He had like a custom one literally built out of a toaster.
Yeah, because maybe that's where, because I do remember seeing his video. But
Yeah.
anyway,
There's also the top loader, which I've shown, but yeah, anyway, go on. Sorry.
that's all right. So, um, to make it interesting here, so from my knowledge about, at least in our community, in our region, uh, there was a console they would refer to as the family. So I'm pretty much guessing that's the
Oh, like the
Famicom.
family computer, yeah.
Yeah, so it was here, but I'm not too well versed in that to know to tell you what it was. Was it something that was a knockoff, or was it the actual thing? That I'm not sure
I
about.
would assume it's a knockoff because I would imagine clones in that. I mean, you're talking about hardware that would have come out in the 1980s in various parts of the Middle East. I'm going to guess a lot of that was not Nintendo officially doing that.
Yeah, unless you had some specific places who would import,
Yeah,
the
that's a
actual
different
sound.
story.
Yeah, or the commoners. Yeah, but um, to make it interesting, here's the thing that interested me personally in the NES. Um, not because of, as we said, the significance of it, but the fact that of how experimental it was in terms of accessories.
Oh, yeah. Like, I will say that. The NES created a ton of stuff that is just absolutely unique. Well, not necessarily unique, but was unique at the time. Let's rephrase.
Yeah, and I have a friend from Canada. He loves the NES; it's his favorite. And so recently, I spoke to him, and he showed me some accessories I didn't even know existed for the Famicom.
Oh yeah, like the
Yeah,
let me
not the
guess, like that
heavy.
Magnum light gun.
No, it wasn't that. It
Oh
was
really? Okay.
no, it wasn't that. It was this kind of internet thing. I don't remember what it was called. It was like a modem. I don't know what it was, but you could like
Oh yeah,
follow
yeah, yeah.
stocks.
I know what you're talking about. It's like its own little box for the Famicom that it basically goes online. I found those in Japanese junk bins before, actually.
Oh, okay, junk is interesting. All right, so I
Yeah,
didn't know.
it wasn't like it wasn't super rare. It's just kind of interesting because we just couldn't believe it really existed.
Yeah, and they could like follow stocks and make some bets on horses or
Yep, yep.
something.
Yeah, horse betting software is
Mm,
a big deal in Japan, or was.
well, it was okay. So that's kind of where it's interesting. And um, um, you know when they introduced uh Rob the robot in Smash?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they introduced him as yeah, but Rob the robot. Yeah.
yeah. So that was one thing that kind of made me interested in it as well. I wanted to get the original one. Um, but in terms of gameplay, I actually when I got the console, I didn't get it from the US. I got the NES from Europe. I can't remember
Okay.
what was up with that, but it had this weird like NES version written on it. I don't know what that
Oh, that's
means.
okay. That's the way they did the European release because correct. I don't totally remember the story for this. I think Mattel was originally responsible for the distribution of the NES in Europe, and then Nintendo themselves wanted to handle it, so they had to differentiate between the two. It was something like that. So if yours said NES version on it of the NES, that was probably the actual Nintendo one.
Oh, okay, because I have that in the box. And that's what I played. So I think I mentioned this before because it's the it's the voltage
Yes.
thing that kind of made me lean towards buying it from Europe if I wanted to play it. Because in here our voltage, the UK is the same, 220. But if I got the American one, then I would have to plug it into transformer and it's a whole mess. But I do
Yeah.
own,
No, that makes complete sense.
yeah, I do own the action set in the American one. And actually,
Mm.
funny enough, I was lucky to get that because that has a gun in it, right?
Yeah, the light gun. I think that's actually the best-selling version of the NES,
Yeah,
at least in North America.
yeah, that's yeah, I believe so too. Because when I was looking for it, I only saw that. There's the other version. I think there's a version that came with the the robot. I think, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
the
but
Gyromite version. Yeah.
yeah. So I was lucky enough to get that because the shipping company initially refused, and I had to explain to them that that's not a real gun.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I had to explain to them
That's
it's
unrelated. I remember buying so that that idea. I remember years ago. For any older guys like me who remember the original Transformers, 1980s, Megatron transformed into a gun, and they stopped producing toys of that in the United States. But every once in a while, they'll do like a new version of the him for Japan only, where he still transforms into a gun, and they always shipped him in the gun mode. And I remember when you wanted to buy that toy, the stores over in Japan would be like, "Yeah, we can ship it, but there's two rules. One, we're legally required to like install like an orange plastic nub. We have to super glue it like into the end of the gun barrel. And two, we have to transform it into robot mode and then ship it that way." I was like, "Okay, whatever."
yeah. Yeah, it was hectic, but I managed to do it.
Yeah.
I managed to do it. So that's a brief on what I have to say about the NES in terms of my perspective on it.
Yeah.
Um, but what I would notice, at least here, I did notice most people are nostalgic for the Super Nintendo, not the NES.
Well, that makes
I think,
sense because I mean,
and I think that translates over
given your
to
age, yeah. I would be lying if I said I was any sort of expert on the history of Nintendo hardware in the UAE or any other Middle Eastern country for that matter. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense if that's what was officially launched there, because the thing with the NES, I want to talk about some of the international stuff with the NES now, if you're up for it.
Yeah.
So the Famicom stuff, you know, we talk about that because it was the obvious one, because the system is Japanese. It came out in Japan. It did extremely well there. It crushed like all of its competition. Everyone was cloning it left, right, and center. I mean, like, in the sense that people are like, oh, I want to emulate that success, so I'm going to try and make a competitor. People often lump Sega into that, but Sega actually released their first console the exact same day, the SG-1000. They just got slaughtered by it, but they kept trying to fight it. And then everyone around the world was making consoles designed to compete with it. Like Atari tried to come back with the 7800 to be like the Famicom, which really, ironically, was developed the same year, but just not released at the same time. It actually wasn't released until after the NES was a big hit. Weird ones too, like the Amstrad GX4000 out of the UK was designed to be, you know, an NES competitor. There's just so many of those. But then also literal cloning. So I find one of the interesting things about the NES to be the time in which it came out was right in the dying days of the Soviet Union. Like, Soviet Union collapses in 1991. So Russia, along with all the other countries that were part of it, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, all of them, I'm not going to list all of them, but like every country that was part of that was barred from having access to Nintendo hardware because Japan was within the West's collective group and it did not do business with the Soviet Union, especially for other reasons that still go back to World War II. But anyway, whatever. So when this Cold War ends in 1991, the Japanese are finally willing to do business with these countries. And, that meant you can get an official SNES release by that point. No one cared about the Famicom anymore. But the Famicom was such a big deal that the people in the Soviet Union, like occasionally someone could get one and they would manage to make clones of it. So that's why there's 1,000,000,001 clones of the NES. Like, not only were there Russian versions, there were mainland Chinese versions. There were then both North and South Korean versions, because even though South Korea is within the same now economic family, the Koreans and the Japanese have a long history of not really liking each other. So anybody who wanted a Famicom in South Korea couldn't get one officially, so they would clone them, and then those clones would make their way around. It was just the amount of cloned. They even have a whole subgroup called Famiclones. It's ridiculous. And then a lot of them were like off the shelf part equivalency is not the way we think of clones now, where you basically take like a single chip and run everything on that. We call it an NOAC. Even that concept died out finally. Like Hyperkin was doing that, and Yobo and all those guys. I think now they would just straight up use emulators and not even pretend to emulate the hardware. They just do it through software. Anyway, so there was 1,000,000 of these clones throughout that part of the world. So that's why I'm thinking that is probably how the Middle East, various countries there got that, but I don't pretend to know that. I do think from what I recall, there is actually an official NES variant from Israel, but that would kind of make sense given their history. But beyond that, I don't know. And I think the Israeli one used like CCAM, which is like the same stuff that was in the French one, but I'm kind of operating off of memory there. But that was the NES style, it wasn't the Famicom style. And I find that fascinating because you also then technically had these two different versions of the system sort of competing with each other. Like, Hong Kong is the only place I've been to that I know that this happened. Nintendo did an official Famicom release there because it was still British, so they were allowed to do it. But they also did an official NES release there. So you had both body designs and different carts for each one, even though it was the same place getting it, which I think is just baffling. Like, the idea that you would do that today is insane. And I guess they did it because, well, in Europe, they got what you have, the NES version of the NES, is like literally what it's branded on there is saying. And because Hong Kong was British, it made sense, but also given their geography being much closer to Japan, it made more sense to have Famicom cartridges, so it made more sense to release their own clone of that, which is just hilarious to me. But then you have other parts of the world, like when they got to Europe, you know, they wanted to go with the more North American style, probably, I would imagine, for the same basic reason. That and the redesign version wouldn't be limited to RF, so it had certain advantages. So they got the bigger cartridges, but as I said before, I think they had some sort of distribution deal with Mattel. I genuinely don't remember if it was Mattel, but that's why they had to brand it NES version on those things. But they had the same size cartridges, but they also used a different region coding. So unless you take out the 10 NES chip, you actually can't use the European games in a North American system. But that's super easy to do. I was actually going to talk about that a little bit because I'm jumping ahead here a bit, but like we have games that were exclusive to other parts of the world. My favorite one from Europe was New Ghostbusters 2. Which is not the same as the Ghostbusters or Ghostbusters 2 we got on the NES in North America. It was actually made by HAL Laboratories, like before they did Smash Brothers. They made a Ghostbusters game for the NES. It got a Famicom release and a European NES release, but never here. Although years later, there's a ROM hack of it that people started putting into like repro carts now that like anybody can do that. Which I think is cool. Before I continue with games and other regional stories, any other thoughts come into your mind about any of this?
The NES.
Yeah, like anything I just said. Does any of that ring a bell or interesting to you or anything?
Yeah, one thing you mentioned when you said the Famiclones, um, I still see those here. Uh,
I would imagine so. Yeah.
yeah, I still see those here, and some people would refer to them as uh, basically to translate it, the original Nintendo from Japan, and it has like computer video game, and it's like green and yellow.
Yeah, that's a Famiclone. Like, they're usually called like TV game. They
Computer
have there's so many of
gen.
those, dude. There's like ones that were just named after stuff that was popular but totally unrelated. So like there's one called the Terminator 2, just because
Mm.
Terminator 2 was a popular movie, and so they made a
Has
clone
like
called that.
stick keywords,
Hmm.
game sounding words, and just put it in, and that's just how it is. And those,
Basically, yeah.
22 or 99999 in one.
Oh, those are a million, a bunch. Yeah, like those are so easy, like to find
Mm.
those. Yeah, tons of those, particularly in those parts of the world. Like I think the most Famiclones I've ever seen was actually in Canada of all places.
Oh,
Um, Not so much that I haven't seen too many of them in the U.S. Like I know they exist here. There's nothing illegal about them or anything like that. It's just that we had the actual regular hardware, but
yeah.
not that Canada didn't. But for some reason, I saw a ton of them up there. Yeah, just kind of crazy. But kind of going back on point here, I was looking again at this Famicom. I've got a stack of Famicom games in front of me. I kind of want to retell the story about like the first time I got a Famicom. Actually, because I mentioned Canada, that's where I got it. Years ago, I did a video on this probably like 12 years ago. I went up to Toronto and I was kind of chatting with this one guy back and forth who was a fan of the channel. I believe his name was Mark. I hope he still watches the channel. I don't know. But he basically said he had a spare Famicom and I could just have it if I was willing to meet up with him. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And sure enough, he just gave me the Famicom, and I still have that. Still my Famicom to this day. I mean, Famicoms are not really rare. If you can find them in Japan, like literally in junk bins all the time. But so there, when you see somebody selling one online, it's like, oh, it's $100. What a good deal. No, it's not. They're ripping you off left, right, and center. Those things are
Mm.
super crazy easy to get. It's just getting them out of Japan that's more of a tedium than anything else. But either way, that's how I got mine. I would get my Famicom disk system, actually Toy Rat, also in Canada, in Ontario. And I've never gotten it repaired. I knew it didn't work, and it didn't matter. It was free. But it was cool just to have this, like, infamous piece of history in video game history. Although it's objectively a terrible way to actually play those games. I mean, like, there's so many better methods now. But that said, over time, I have amassed quite a decent little collection of Famicom games, and I wanted to talk about a couple of them, just because, for as many NES games that came out, the number of Famicom games that came out is absolutely ridiculous, and we only got a handful of them, comparatively. And so these are some of the ones I find interesting for one reason or another. Not necessarily the best games, but just interesting. So, Abdullah, are you familiar with a game called Sweet Home?
Sweet Home.
Yeah. It's okay if you're
No,
not. I'm
not
just
really.
curious if
No.
you have. Okay, so
No,
Sweet
no.
Home is an infamous game because it's sort of the first Resident Evil game. The original Resident Evil that we know of that came out in the mid 90s and PS1, Saturn, all that, was actually a remake of this game called Sweet Home. And it was made by Capcom originally, and it's just like a horror game where these people are like trying to survive inside of a mansion with zombies and all that sort of stuff. It was a remake of that, and once Resident Evil blew up into its own series, Sweet Home kind of got forgotten and left, way behind. But to its credit, like at least the community's credit, it has been translated into English now, fan patched, and you can actually find reproduction carts of it that'll run on an NES with the English dump, which is pretty cool. So if you ever want to like really go back and truly check out all the Resident Evil stuff, if you want to include that one, you can do that. So next up I have Transformers Mystery of Convoy, which always should have been Convoy, but it does say COM. When I was a kid, one of my favorite franchises in this world, as I just kind of alluded to, was the Transformers. I love them from the 1980s. Even though I grew up in the 90s, I still loved the 80s ones just for various reasons. Now, anybody who was a Transformers and video game fan in that era will know that there were very, very, very few video game options that existed for Transformers content. Despite its popularity, it had almost no serious game attempts until like the PlayStation 2. But this was one of the handful that actually got out, and it was only in Japan, and the game is terrible, famously terrible. But I did want a copy of it just because of what it represents. You play as Ultra Magnus, and you basically are running along, and you just get shot by Starscream constantly, and then you get like one hit and you're dead. It's just a genuinely awful game, but the fact that it was made is cool.
Yeah, I mean, some games
Yeah, go
are
ahead.
just worth it because of how bad they are.
Yeah, that one is kind of like, I'm not sure he ever did it. AVGN might have covered that game at some point. It is really it's just a terrible game. I'm gonna just say it though, like, controversial statement, but kind of true. Most games on the NES are really not very good. Like, a lot of them did not age that well and are really difficult to kind of jump into now. And that has nothing with being older than this, or younger than the system, I say. But because I love my nostalgia, I love my retro games, I will go back and play them. It's just that most of them just did not age as well as they could have. Whereas I feel like a lot of 16-bit stuff did. And by the same token, like a lot of the early 5th gen stuff did not age that well, where 6th gen stuff did. I think it was just kind of
The
a
experimental part
balancing
of it,
act.
yeah.
But yeah, exactly. Like, I kind of said this before in the past that the 8th gen, or sorry, 8th gen, the 4th gen, no, 3rd gen. The 3rd gen is, which is the NES, is where they were kind of figuring out like what 2D games could really be. And by the 4th gen, which is the SNES Genesis, they had really perfected it. Same logic with the 5th gen. 5th gen is where like the N64, PS1, they were figuring out what 3D game content could be. And then the 6th gen is where they really perfected it. And ever since then, it's been more about, upping the resolution, upping the textures, and making bigger content, but not necessarily the gameplay mechanics all that much. I mean, obviously there have been changes. Don't get me, I'm not insane. And there's plenty of good games on the NES and the PS1. I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying as an overall general trend, that just seemed to be how it was. But anyway, that's just a matter of opinion. But back to some games here. And speaking of this one, which kind of exists for the exact same reason as the Transformers game, one that I'm kind of shocked we didn't get. There was a Famicom game called Super Sentai Zyuranger, which is the Japanese version of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And why that game never came over, I'm not quite sure. Like, there's certain elements they would have had to have changed just so it would make sense with the continuity of the US show as opposed to the Japanese show. But I just don't know why they never did it. Other than maybe by the time that Power Rangers was big, I mean, we got Genesis games, we got Super Nintendo games, but maybe they just thought there was no point in an NES title at that point because it probably would have been like 94 and the system was kind of dead at that point. That's the only reason I could think they never brought it over. But I mean, that company, Saban, loved to slap Power Rangers on anything. So I'm really surprised they didn't try to squeeze some life out of the NES, but they did not. Next up, I have this game that I had never heard of, but a buddy of mine in Japan highly recommended it because he's like, it's super playable for anybody. And he was right. It was fun. It's 4-wheel drive Battle Clash, which is just like a little kart type of racing game where you just drive around and, you know, just kind of a mix of like a Micro Machines and a Rocket League, you know, but for the Famicom. It was fun from what I remember playing of it. This one I bought simply because I could not believe it existed. Donald Land, which is a McDonald's game featuring Ronald McDonald and like his evil cousin or something. I don't remember exactly what the premise is, but why, again, this never came out on the NES, I don't know, because the NES did get a McDonald's game. It got Mick and Mac Global Gladiators, but this one where you're just playing as Ronald McDonald in like an enchanted forest or whatever, I don't know. It's kind of a fun game, actually. And then lastly, of all the ones I want to talk about, is there's a version of Splatterhouse that exists on the Famicom. This one I don't know enough about the history of. I don't know if this came out after the more infamous Splatterhouse entries, and that it was just like retroactively produced, or what it was. But my point is, there was just a bunch of cool Japanese exclusive games, and more than this, obviously, that existed that we just never got in North America, and nor did the Europeans ever get. And it's just kind of unfortunate, but at least now it's relatively easy to access most of these games if you want to check them out. Point is, if you're a big fan of the NES, and there's plenty of you out there, and you think you know its library pretty well, dive into the Famicom stuff. Yeah. Dive into some of the European exclusives. There is so much content out there that you've never tried. Sorry, you had a reaction there. Go for it.
Yeah, I was just about to say that I think in North America it's about 700 or something games total.
Yeah, I don't know. You got me there. I don't know.
Well, neither am I. I'm not too sure. Don't quote me on this. But
okay,
I have the same friend of mine because he's a big fan. So he told me essentially what you just said. He said if you think that the North American library is a lot, just go to Japan and you'll see some crazy stuff over there.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. And I mean, I'm not enough of an NES collector to know this, but I would imagine there are regional exclusive games in other parts of the world. Like the Europeans got, I think it was like 80 titles the US never got. Now that, to be fair, some of those came out in Japan as well. How many are truly 100% European? I could not say. And I say European is kind of a catch-all for that whole geographic reason, obviously, or region. Obviously not, Europe's not a country, but you get what I'm saying. I've never heard of an Australian exclusive, but it's not impossible to think that there's some random Famicom game that only came out in Hong Kong or something like that. I genuinely don't know. But what I can tell you is the Japanese section is really where you want to pay attention if you like the NES. Like, there's just so many of those. And like I said, a lot of them have been translated over. Like, Sweet Home is one of them. I think that Power Rangers game I was even talking about got translated at some point, because we live in that era now where it's actually relatively easy to translate a lot of this stuff. So we're seeing more and more of these games become accessible, which I think is actually pretty cool. One other thing I want to talk about before I guess we end this, but if you have any other thoughts, please do tell. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Brazilian version of this. Are you familiar with this story of the NES going to Brazil?
No, not really, but you did remind me of something.
All right, well, you want to tell that first, and I'll talk about Brazil after? Go ahead.
Talk about Brazil first, then because it's a small thing. It's a small thing.
Okay. Okay, so all I was going to say is basically, so like I said, around the time when Nintendo was getting the NES into various countries, its priority was obviously Japan, and then the US/Canada was number 2. And I don't know exactly what the sequence of events was, but obviously, like we talked about with Europe and the whole Mattel version, again, I'm assuming it was Mattel, that Nintendo really didn't know how to handle distribution in other parts of the world, which kind of makes sense because it was Nintendo's first attempt at a home console aside from the TV Game 6, and it was certainly their first attempt outside of Japan. So basically, they didn't know what they didn't know. So that was probably why they were linking up with various local groups. And in one case with Europe, that's what they did. In a lot of countries, they just couldn't do, like the Soviet Union, like we said. But what's interesting is they did want to tap into Brazil. Now, Brazil to this day is a massive country. It's a strong economy. You know, there's a lot of people there who obviously love video games. It's a great place to be. But they've never been super relevant when it came to video games. They're always just considered kind of an oddity. And I think a lot of it originates in this. Now, setting aside any geopolitical reasons or domestic political reasons, it was hard for Nintendo to get into Brazil. This is ultimately what they did. They basically went there and said, we don't really know what we're doing here, so we're going to partner with a local company and basically let them do it. The partner they selected was a company called Gradiente, or I pronounce it Gradiente, which is objectively wrong. I think in Portuguese it would be like Gradiente or something like that. And that company was basically told, okay, you know, bring the NES to Brazil. And they're like, okay. But they did it like the most Brazilian way you could, which is you're trying to do cost-cutting measures just to get the product released. Because Nintendo, to be fair, didn't really give them many resources to work with, not a lot of money to work with. And they gave them maybe a little too much slack. So what Gradiente does is they end up basically using surplus like Atari 7800 shells, and they use surplus Sega Genesis or Mega Drive controllers, and they put an NES board inside that. And so they released this system that was called basically an almost official Nintendo product that had their direct competitors like hardware in it, which was just bizarre. From Nintendo's perspective, they were like freaking out. So Nintendo pulled their support and said like, no, but by that point they couldn't really stop them from releasing it. But they did take Nintendo's name off of it. So, but they were still allowed to release games, and certain third-party devs like Activision still openly supported it, partially as an FU to Nintendo because they didn't like Nintendo's policies in the US. But at the same time, I have some of these games, and so like when they released Super Mario Brothers there, they weren't allowed to call it that. Even though I think the ROM is exactly the same file. So like the artwork was just done by some Brazilian guy, and he looks like he's on drugs. It's like Super Mario Brothers or something. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't read it, but it's just hilarious, the story of that. Now there was other attempts. I think it was the Sinclair got in down there, and that was like, this is kind of like I said with Hong Kong, where you had an official Famicom and an official NES at the same time. They had sort of official / unofficial versions of the NES / Famicom. And I believe the Sinclair mostly used the Famicom style with like 60 pins instead of 72. Whereas the Phantom, which is the Gradiente one, used 72 pins. And eventually Nintendo kind of made the same policy with everybody once Super Nintendo came out, by the way. They were like, we understood that everybody cloned the crap out of the NES. We're willing to let bygones be bygones. Let's open up new relations, which is why the Super Nintendo really didn't see the same kind of clones. They had more of an official presence in Brazil and eventually Russia and places like that. Although unrelated, but sort of tangential, I was in Cuba back in like 2019, and the dude I was hanging out with there swore up and down that when he was a kid, he had a cloned Super Nintendo. And that it had been actually made by, it was like Russian stuff that was dumped in there because the Soviet Union collapsed, so they weren't allowed to use it, and it ended up in Cuba because they were still in defiance. But I don't really know if that's true. He couldn't really prove it, and so it's like, okay, whatever. But he seemed to know the difference between a Famicom and a Super Famicom. Anyway, so the point of the story here is the NES had a crazy history. It very regional. Every single section it came out in or didn't come out in, but then ultimately had a clone in, has some unique story or history. It is just a system that really reached the like majority of the globe, and it's nothing like that is too likely to ever happen again, because the last time we saw anything even close to that was the PlayStation 2. but the PS2 was very uniform. Like Sony had complete control of it. It was the same basic design in most of the world. There weren't a bunch of PS2 clones by other companies. Or other companies who like had the license and made their own special thing, or where Sony didn't bother to distribute it, so they let different companies take it over. You know what I'm trying to say? That
Yeah.
idea with the Famicom/NES is just so bizarre, and I genuinely pity anybody who is an NES super fan who actually like, I want a global set. Good luck to you, sir or madam. Anyway, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna highlight something that's interesting to me. You mentioned a couple of games, so there's just two things I want to say. Number one, is how it's some of the rare games on it, just by themselves are interesting stories on their own. Um, the specific thing I wanted to highlight, and it's not a rare game at all. I doubt that it uh, is I'm a big Dragon Ball fan. I know you're not an anime person.
No, no, but
I
all of
know.
you, dude.
Yeah, so there was this game called Dragon Power, released in North America. And up until recently, I realized that this was actually a Dragon Ball game. But then they had to just
Oh yeah.
change it, to change it.
That's not that shocking
Yeah,
considering how the NES was so like
and I
cowboy coded, but yeah.
yeah, and I saw the cover, and it's a whole mess, completely different than
So it's just
what
like a
I've.
mess.
Well, yeah,
Have you did you pick it up?
no, not really, but
Oh, you should. Like just add it to your collection of weird stuff.
yeah, it's so weird because it's they just turned Goku into totally. It's a whole mess.
Unfortunately, they really had to do that with a lot of licensing problems. I mean,
Yeah.
what probably happened, I don't know this for sure, is they either lost the license to do it or the Bandai, because I think they own Dragon Ball Z, didn't find the
Mhm.
game of sufficient quality, or it could be any number of things. Or I know that Nintendo had weird restrictions on developers where you were only allowed to, or publishers rather, you were only allowed to publish 5 games a year, like on your specific IP. So people were making up new companies to dump out games. Maybe something like
Mhm.
that happened. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the same thing happened with Mega Man or something in the cover. I'm not so sure about that though.
Oh, famously, the Mega Man cover art
Mm.
in North America is terrible. Yeah,
Oh, okay, then I
it's
got
kind
the.
of known for that.
Oh, okay, then I got the fact right.
Yeah, that
Uh,
one's infamous. But I guess we'll leave it with this. So, if you guys saw the video that I did sort of on this subject about the 40th anniversary and all that, I told this story about how the first game I ever saw was Paperboy on the NES,
mhm.
but I didn't get to play it at the time. And so after making that video, I decided to go look through my NES collection, and I realized I actually don't own a copy of Paperboy. And so I don't have the original one, which is not a problem. But I'm thinking that I'm now going to make that a mission of mine. I don't know when. It's not even like a big mission here. But at some point, I'm going to prioritize. I need to buy a copy of Paperboy on NES just so I have a copy of the first video game I ever saw. I think that's appropriate. So that's my new mission statement there. Abdullah, any other thoughts? Anything you want to say before we go?
Uh, no, not really. I mean, if we're gonna talk about this console, it's gonna take like two podcasts or something if we want to dive into it.
Yeah, I know. You could talk about the
Yeah,
NES like all day. Like I'm sure there's entire podcasts dedicated to just that. We're obviously truncating, but we just went
yeah,
over 40 minutes or so, and it's 40 years old. So I think that's a good that's a
that's
good
good
stopping
enough.
point, relatively speaking. Yeah. All right. Well, Abdullah, obviously,
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining me and picking that
Welcome.
subject along with Spencer Purrier. We combined both of them into that. So huge shout out to both of you guys. And once again, shout outs to Trey Wagner, Michael Kelly Loke, and Sega Steve, and obviously Joseph for joining me earlier, as well as Sinjeet for the subject he selected. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, everybody out there. If you could like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, obviously, so you can get this, early access to it, as well as other videos, and just support the channel. I always appreciate it. But also check out Spreadshirt if you want any merch or anything like that. I got that. And my travel channel if you just want to check out other things that I get up to. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.